And so I just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I'll keep letting folks roll in. But yeah, thank you for joining us on this beautiful Friday morning for our April Coffee and Climate about sharing economies and electric tools. And today we'll be diving into some of the ways that communities can share resources and ways to reduce waste. My name is Katie Timms, and I'm from the City of Portland Sustainability Office, and I'm here joined by members in my South Portland office. We have the Sustainability Director, Julie Rosenbach, Cashel Stewart, the Transportation Manager, and Susan Parmalee. I know Steve Genovese is here somewhere too. And I'd like to just start by mentioning that sharing economies play a really large role in waste reduction, which is one of the key strategies of our One Climate Future plan. And so one of our specific actions actually outlined in this plan is to foster a circular and sharing economy. And this takes form in a lot of different ways here in Portland and South Portland. If you think of like public libraries or shared community kitchens or thrift shops or community gardens too. These all cultivate and continue to, we continue to strengthen a circular and sharing economy here locally. And before I introduce our guest here today, Dr. Brieanne Berry, I'd like to pass it over to our South Portland Sustainability Office, who can speak a little bit more on the topic and why we included electric tools today.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Right. Perfect. Can you guys see my slideshow? Okay, great. Katie did a great job of introducing everyone, but I'm Susan Parmalee. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager for the City of South Portland, and I'm going to be briefly talking about our new South Portland Electric Tool Library, which is affectionately referred to as the SPETL. Okay. So what exactly is it? It's a library of electric lawn equipment that will be free for South Portland residents with a valid library card to use. The goal is to get people to use electric equipment instead of gas-powered lawn equipment, and to provide the opportunity for residents to borrow electric tools instead of buying them, or to give people who are considering switching to electric lawn tools the opportunity to try before they buy. So all of the electric tools that are going to be in the SPETL are Ego brands, and it will include lawnmowers, leaf blowers, string trimmers, edgers, and hedge trimmers. And this project was completely funded through a DEP waste diversion grant that the Sustainability Department applied for and received last year. So how will it work? So this small shed right here, it's kind of a beige color. That is the SPETL, and it's here next to the swap shop at the South Portland transfer station. So we're in the process of hiring an intern to manage both the SPETL and the swap shop. So when you're ready to rent a piece of equipment, you will go to the transfer station and pull up to the shed here, and the SPETL manager will walk you through the process of checking out the equipment. If the equipment that you're looking for is available, you can sign it out using your library card, and the SPETL manager will provide you with a demonstration of how to use the equipment and answer any questions that you have that might come up. We will require borrowers to sign a waiver and provide credit card information. And this is really just as a precaution to ensure that the equipment is returned and treated properly. We would only charge a card if equipment were lost, stolen, or severely damaged. We really don't want to charge anyone for anything. And a resident can sign out equipment for 3 days, and then you just bring it back to the shed right here and drop it off with the SPETL manager, and that is really it. So I'm going to talk briefly about how this relates to the One Climate Future plan. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050 is one of the overarching goals. Gas-powered lawn equipment produces a lot of pollution, Two-stroke engines are especially egregious polluters, which are common in smaller lawn equipment, like handheld leaf blowers or string trimmers, as well as some smaller lawnmowers. And according to the California Air Resource Board, 1 hour of gas-powered leaf blower use emits the air pollution equivalent of driving a car 1,100 miles, which is a big number. So offering the free use of electric lawn equipment will help reduce air emissions. Another is Waste Reduction 1.5, which is fostering a sharing economy. One Climate Future says that cities that both Portland and South Portland will support the development of new and existing spaces for sharing items, including tool libraries or other lending libraries. So this very much describes the SPEDL and will encourage South Portland residents to borrow electric equipment rather than buy their own. And then another one that it relates to is Climate Resilience 5.2, soil health. As I mentioned before, gas-powered lawn equipment, especially two-stroke engines, are really terrible polluters, which contaminates not only the air, but also the soil. So providing residents with these tools will help prevent soil pollution that's associated with the use of gas-powered lawn equipment. Okay, and now, when can you go to the SPEDL? The question everyone is wondering. So the grand opening is June 3rd. It will be open 3 days a week. June through October is what we're aiming for. We don't know exactly what the 3 days will be yet, but definitely Saturday. And then the 2 other days will be kind of determined by the SPEDL manager's schedule. And again, it's located at the South Portland Transfer Station at 929 Highland Ave. And we are in the process of hiring the SPEDL manager. So if you know anyone that's interested, please apply. And that's it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Susan. I even saw, I think on the news the other day, they were talking about how bad gas-powered equipment is. And I was like, I'm glad this is, I think it's really coming into more folks' attention. So
yeah, I think people didn't realize how bad they are. It was a surprise to me too, but yeah, the more we know.
Cool. Well, I would now like to welcome Dr. Brieanne Berry. Bree holds a Master of Science in Urban Affairs from Hunter College in New York and received her PhD in Anthropology and Environmental Policy from the University of Maine. And she has professional experience ranging from energy efficiency consulting in urban apartment buildings to recycling in New York City public schools. So Bree truly has a broad understanding of how urban sustainability initiatives work on the ground. Most of her research sits at the intersection of environmental and economic anthropology and explores sustainable consumption and waste reduction with a particular focus on discard studies, the anthropology of work, and theories of alternative capitals and economies. And so I couldn't think of a better person today to join us and explore the topic of sharing economies. So I want to thank you all for being so flexible and taking the time to be here on this beautiful Friday. And without taking any more of your time, I would like to pass it over to Bree.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to see if I can share my screen successfully. How does that look to you? Awesome. So I'm so excited to be even remotely in Maine. I'll tell you right now before I get started. So I'm at Ursinus College, where I'm an assistant professor of environmental studies. So I left Maine almost a year ago now, which is still a little bit sad for me. But I want to say before I get started that so Ursinus College is in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, Delaware Nation at Moraviantown, Stockridge Munsee community, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. And so a lot of our community derives its names from the Lenape language, and just want to acknowledge where I am in the world, because it's different than where you all are. But I'm delighted to share this digital space with you to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done on secondhand economies, which I think are really, really related to this idea of sharing. So before I go any further, though, I have to say that the work that I'm going to talk about is connected to a whole bunch of people who are not present today. So over the course of the last 6 or even 7 years, we worked with 11 undergraduate students, 4 grad students, and any number of faculty and staff at the University of Maine to make this work happen on understanding Maine's reuse economies. And in particular, I'm going to talk way more about Cindy Eisenhower, who was kind of the lead person on this project and has been really, really critical in thoroughly understanding Maine's secondhand economies. So just to give you a sense of what I'm drawing from, I am part of a team that was called Resourceful Me, which started in 2015. We've done all kinds of research on secondhand economies, from business surveys of reuse establishments to archival research to understand the history of Maine's cultures of reuse. We've done household surveys across the state of Maine to understand how people participate in secondhand economies. And then what I'm going to share with you today is mostly related to some of the ethnographic research I've done in Maine communities. So looking really carefully at particular places and people and how they derive meaning and value from secondhand economies. We've also got other really cool data sets. We asked people to log everything they bought and got rid of used over the course of a month. So we have this like super cool, rich data set that we're still kind of parsing through. So this is kind of how things have shaped up over time. And this probably won't be news to any of you, but I feel like it's always helpful to set the stage for why it's important to think about secondhand or sharing, which is, we continue to use more stuff over time. And more than 50% of all of our greenhouse gas emissions are related to materials management activities. 75% or close to it of municipal waste is generated by discarded consumer goods. And it's just like shocking to me that 90% of the stuff that we get is going to be buried or burned within 6 months of sale. And reuse can be a huge help here, right? We can reduce municipal waste by at least 25% if we can just keep things circulating rather than discarding it. So as part of this project, what some of the stuff we wanted to know was, connections between reuse and economic health. There's a lot of assumptions that reuse is only connected to poverty. People only get used stuff if they're really poor and they can't afford new. And we did some work to kind of poke holes in that assumption. We wanted to understand the economic contribution of reuse to the state of Maine. So what is the value of secondhand in kind of dollars and cents? But what I wanted to talk mostly about today is the relationship between reuse and something called social capital, which is this idea that our networks have value. And our relationships have value. But I do want to show you the money stuff because people tend to get really excited about this. So I'll show you that and then tell you why I think it's not the only thing we should care about. So we did a statewide household survey to understand how people participate in reuse economies. And we asked folks how much they spent over the course of the year on reuse and repair. And what we got from that is it's our best estimate. Our survey respondents were a little older, a little wealthier, a little more educated than Mainers on average. So it's not exactly representative. But what we found is that households were spending about $1,000 per year on used stuff, which ends up being about $570 million per year in the state of Maine. They're spending about $280 per year on repair. And with some multiplier effects that our economists could talk to you about in greater detail, and I won't even attempt to dip my toe in that, we estimate really conservatively that the secondhand market's contribution to the state of Maine is about $726 million a year. So pretty significant. We're not talking small change here. But what we don't often talk about, because it's harder to measure, is some of the stuff that feels really intangible. So what you see right here is a network map of reuse in 2 rural Maine communities. I've changed their names just to protect the privacy of these the people and places that I worked in over the course of a year. So call them Jordan and Milltown. And these lines that you see represent the flow of used stuff. And the circles represent individuals, organizations, companies, and events. So we're not looking at the movement of any one particular thing, but just how things move through these secondhand economies. And so if you're overwhelmed by this map, I'm right there with you. The first thing you could take away from it is that it's a really dense network, right? Stuff is moving between people and organizations as some organizations and people find value in things that others don't need anymore. And what I learned is that many objects live really long lives in the community, passing from one person to the next through really complex pathways. And so what I've done here is I've actually highlighted one person in particular who I call Kaylee, who can help us kind of think about the social value of secondhand markets. So when we look at her indirect networks, right, taking away some of that extra stuff that she doesn't engage with, we can see that Kaylee's getting and receiving stuff from a local nonprofit thrift shop, and that she redistributes stuff to a network of friends, we can see here. She also sells some stuff at local sales and donates textiles through a local textile recycling bin. So her participation in reuse really connects her to the larger community. And all of her links to these different organizations are social connections, right? It's a means of providing support, income, or sociality. But what I think is really interesting and where my research is kind of going next is that when Kaylee sells some stuff on eBay, it helps her make ends meet. But what's interesting to me is that in terms of sociality, online sales are a terminating node. So the social value of reuse is lost to that local community, even as it provides some benefit to Kaylee as an individual. So those maps help us understand kind of the big picture of reuse in these small towns. So we see social relationships, mutual aid, and community resilience kind of at play. We can also think about this in monetary terms, where we calculated that the nonprofit reuse sector in these two small rural communities generates about $148,000 annually, which is roughly the parks and recreation budget of one of the towns. So this money literally built the library. It goes to support, it purchased a town ambulance, it provided infrastructure investments for local healthcare facilities, and it continues to provide literacy programs for kids, hunger relief, community suppers, and a lot more. So really, reuse is really important to these rural communities, but because it's hard to tally up, we don't often see how vital it is. Even though it's very tempting to look at the monetary value of things, I'm really, really focused on this social value. And I wanted to share a couple stories about using the words of people who I spoke with about why reuse matters to them. And each of these stories represents a theme that came up over and over and over again in the research that I did. And I just wanted to start by with saying there's one person who talks about why we don't tend to see the social value of these nonprofit localized reuse establishments. And he is one of many people to share the idea that this sector is powered predominantly by elderly women, and this work tends to go unseen. So he told me that it does not surprise me even a little bit that as a community, we haven't got a clue about what's going on there because it's so freaking complex and it's also completely below the radar. And it's because it's a bunch of old ladies doing it. If it was guys with ties doing that stuff, it would be like civic awards and they'd be standing up, right? But that's not the mode at work here. So there's a ton of academic literature that supports this idea that volunteer labor, the labor of women, and particularly elderly women, tends to go unseen and uncounted. But nevertheless, it's really important. We see it contributing to building trust. Yeah, many of our reuse organizations give stuff away with the promise of later payments. So one store owner told me that if someone comes in and they need something and they don't have any money, I'm like, well, take it and bring it back when you get some money. And then I forget, and they always come back and pay me and I forget all about it. And this is a really different experience than what you might get at a big box retailer, right? This level of community trust. We also see reuse giving people a chance to participate in civic life. And for some folks, it's a really important connection, giving people the chance to connect with others and give back to their communities. Yet this same, the value of volunteering and giving back to the community also causes some tension. And volunteering can be exhausting. So one participant told me, most days I feel really gratified that I've used my ability to make money for this organization that does so many good things. But there are times when I resent it because I do work so hard and other people don't. So this reuse is really hard work. It involves sorting through a seemingly unending flow of stuff, lifting heavy bags, hauling stuff to trucks and dumpsters, hanging and displaying stuff, and it never seems to stop. And this exhaustion is really exacerbated by the fact that many of these really small nonprofit reuse organizations are run by elderly volunteers. And they're getting more and more donations, and the work is getting really a lot harder physically, with few younger people stepping in to fill these volunteer roles. So one man who generates thousands of dollars each year for a local nonprofit by sorting, hauling, and selling books told me, I think it keeps me alive. I enjoy it. I really do. And I do know at my age, I've got to get somebody because I can't do it forever. You know, I'm 87 years old. And as long as I'm able to keep doing it, I will. But I know realistically that I've got to talk somebody into it. I've got my eye on a couple of people, younger people. So he's hauling heavy boxes of books many days a week. And he sees that it's not sustainable for him. So what I wanted to just, give you a snapshot here is that I see these reuse networks as really complex, and stuff moves in really interesting ways within communities. And it's really socially generative. We see really strong relationships of trust, support, civic engagement, and relationships. These are all components of social capital, right? This idea that our network connections can help us achieve more than we could as individuals. But what I think is really important is that not all reuse is the same. So the social relationships generated from these really small scale reuse establishments is different than what happens in online marketplaces. But I also always want to shout out that this work is really hard and that we need stronger support and deeper engagement from a wide range of people to keep it sustainable. So just to give you a sense of, so I left Maine, which still makes me sad, but still thinking about these questions. And what I'm trying to do now is trying to understand some of the social differences between online re-commerce, this sector of reuse that's going really rapidly through sites like Poshmark and ThreadUp, and even on Instagram, and in-person reuse. So what are the trade-offs there? And I'm trying to explore the behaviors and the impacts of resellers, particularly people who are selling stuff online. And then a last question that I'm really thinking actively about is looking at issues of stigma and reuse participation. So the focus on reuse continues. So I just wanted to say thanks again for coming, everyone, and for letting me do a really quick dive into some of the social dimensions of reuse. I have a picture here of Cindy Eisenhower, who again is a mentor, trusted colleague, and really good partner on all this reuse work. Just wanted to acknowledge some of the folks that have given us support over the last few years. But I'll put this up. I'd love to hear from you if you have thoughts or questions. I love talking about reuse, but I can also put my email in the chat or share with all of you. But I appreciate your time. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see all of you, but I really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Bree. I think this topic is so interesting, and I don't know, I grew up in Maine, and it feels kind of like a very much an identity of New Englanders in Maine. So I don't know, I'm so intrigued, and I hope people have questions or thoughts or just want to talk about it. Anyone?
I'm gonna hopefully kick people off with just a comment or something that that's always curious to me is that we're looking, we're trying to build a circular economy and really drive people towards reuse, and there seems to be a bit of a tension between just how much stuff is out there and how much consumption is out there, and moving people towards reuse. And I wonder if you must think about that a lot, and if you can comment on that. I mean, we have so many kids things that people have given to us, but it's just everywhere. Like there's so much stuff, and yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I wrote a whole paper about this, just called Glut. Like, we have so much stuff. And one of the interesting things that I try really hard to advocate for is when I work with local communities, sometimes they're like, well, we don't want to compete with our thrift store. You know, we don't want to take anything away from them. And it's like, oh my goodness, you couldn't have too many reuse establishments, right? Like, there's the stuff that gets discarded from thrift shops is astounding, just because there's no way to keep it all. And we just have so many materials moving through our economies. So yeah, the problem of too much stuff is really real, and it presents an interesting opportunity for reuse. There's a lot that we can use again, as long as it's high enough quality. But yeah, I always say, like, there's room for plenty more reuse establishments.
Bill, see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. You know, one issue I could see coming up is the Yankee thrifter who wants to maintain their gas guzzling car for 2 decades. I know we used to have a junk to dollar program, which I took advantage of quite a long time ago, but I just wonder whether maintaining something that is causing harm to our environment, whether that's going to be dealt with in another way. And I can understand, you know, inanimate objects and recycling them, but if a gas-powered vehicle continues to ride on the road, that's going to be I think, a problem in trying to electrify our transportation system. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there have been good studies on the environmental impacts of reuse that suggest that there are limits to the benefits of reuse for certain kinds of items, and specifically things like white goods. And yeah, you could think about cars, where there are really much more efficient options out there. For things like textiles, it's always better to reuse basically than to buy new, no matter what new thing you get. But yeah, there are trade-offs. And I love this idea of the Yankee thrifter. Yeah, because there's this, you know, some of the work we did on the cultures of reuse in Maine was like this really strong ethos of use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without. And you definitely see that in Maine, right? Like, I'm going to use this thing until it's dead, and then I'm going to bring it back to life. And there's a sense in which that can do some harm, depending on the object.
I just want to add to that, because there's the useful life and the embodied energy in the product that's already made, and we want to get as much value out of that. But then there's a whole nother dimension if something is currently and actively using fossil fuels, and we want to switch to electrification and renewable energy. So like for buildings, the embodied energy, if you can keep that, it's so much more valuable than raising the building and starting from new. But I think we have to look at, you know, our heating systems and our transportation systems a little bit differently when we want to transition over.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go for it, Diane.
I'm wondering kind of like what systems you've found that people use for sharing goods or giving goods. I know you mentioned thrift stores, and like we use our Buy Nothing group quite a lot, but I'm wondering like if there's an informal way that people are borrowing from one another, because Buy Nothing is really like a gift economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, I didn't hear about systematic ways that people are borrowing. I was thinking when you started asking that question, something that does feel like almost quintessentially Maine is the very formal system of leaving stuff by the side of the road, which is an active strategy in Maine in ways that you don't see in other places, as is the transfer station swap shop. These are features of Maine communities that are, if not unique, then at least special within the state. The thing with borrowing is that you have to have some level of trust, right, between people you're borrowing with. And so there are internet-based platforms that are trying to approximate that trust through things like reviews and assessing fees and things like that. But I think these community institutions like the Spettle are good models to think about, like how to make sharing possible between people that don't know each other, but in ways that maybe don't center around profit, which, yeah, I'll leave it there. Lots of thoughts about for-profit sharing that I won't share here.
I'm sorry, I keep commenting, but I just have one other comment, is that as valuable as the formal systems, like part of the circular economy is building community resilience through informal systems of getting together with your neighbors or talking with your neighbors or just like a group of people who want to go in on something. And I think the more that this reuse and the circular economy can bring people together in discussion and in relationships around sharing, I think the better. So I think they're both very valuable.
That's such a great point, and something that people don't talk about enough, I don't think. So sometimes we think about circular economies just in terms of like how materials move, but there's social systems too, right? And to the extent that we want to, right, we want circular economies because we want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, reduce waste. But there's all kinds of problems with our existing linear economies. They're not fair. They're not particularly good at getting things to people who need them. And if we think about circular economies as solving all different kinds of problems, then one of the problems is explicitly social. So if we can build relationships between people and foster that kind of community support, I think that should be one really important goal of circular systems. Yeah, creating economies that are a little bit more equitable and a little bit more people-centered.
Hi, Bree. I'm Alethea. I'm the Associate Director of Sustainability at the University of New England, and we're actually looking at developing a thrift shop on campus for next year. And I was just wondering if you had like sort of like your top 3 suggestions for how to get started in this realm of organized thrifting on a college campus. What would be your like top 3 that I can pass on to the student group that's looking into this?
Oh my gosh, Alethea, we are doing the same thing at Ursinus College right now. So we are actually going through, I was just developing a questionnaire with my students to try and assess student needs and wants from our free market. So things that so I can't give you like established best practices because we're still putting into place here at our small liberal arts school, but things that we're thinking about are, trying to assess whether, in our case, a free store, whether it's something that people want to be private, like, do they want their participation to feel like anonymous and confidential, like no one will know that they're there, or do they want it to be a social space where they can engage with their peers, right? So we're trying to ask those questions without assuming that there's one right way to do this. We are also thinking really hard about whether or not we care what people do with the stuff they get at the free store. So do we care if they sell it online, or does it not matter to us? And so for us, it's really about being clear what our goals are. If it's to keep items circulating and to benefit our students, then it doesn't matter what they do with it. But if it's about contributing to our local community, then we probably don't want them to sell it. So we've had to do a lot of like careful thinking about what our real goals are and, what we want to get out of this. Ours is going to be called Bear Share. What we want to get out of Bear Share.
So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, good name, right? I didn't choose it. I wish I did.
I have a comment and also a question. They're not connected though. I was with some of my friends from New York last weekend, and apparently one of them just got recently hired at a job where it's an exchange program, or a borrowing program for kids materials like cribs and kids clothes and things like that, because nobody in New York has enough space to keep their spare crib in a closet. And so I was like, oh my God, that's awesome to be participating in some kind of a system like that. So I do think, there's such a huge problem with kids materials just because they grow out of everything. But I would love to know more about if you have started to dig into the research about the difference between those online kind of resale stores like Poshmark, which we all get ads for, or at least I do all the time, or yeah, your central like local reuse thrift stores.
Yeah. Well, so the kid stuff thing is really interesting because it puts us in a like sometimes an uncomfortable space where a lot of the stuff we get for kids, we're worried about risk, right? So things like cribs and mattresses and, you know, was that bouncy seat recalled and all these different things, car seats. It's really hard to move them on to another life because there is so much at stake, it feels like. And so trust is super important there. Like I got a used car seat, but I trusted the person I got it from, that they said they hadn't been in an accident. And so some things I think will only be successful in moving through informal networks. And that will be a huge way that we combat waste. But we have to have those really strong relationships and kind of have ways to foster those, or else it's just so much easier to throw it away and get it new.
And car seats have expiration dates. And are those like the food expiration dates to be, you know, or should you really move it on after that?
Yeah. And gosh, what's his name? Have you all seen Adam Minter's book, Secondhand Travels in the New Global Garage Sale? If not, it's a good one. But he has a section on car seats. And he argues pretty vehemently that the car seat expiration dates are not meaningful, based on his conversations with people who are involved in manufacturing and safety testing, which is not my endorsement to use your car seats for longer than it says, but like, it is worth thinking whether they're useful or whether they're just manufacturing waste. Sorry, that's my just 2 cents. As a parent of a 3-year-old, can be like, a game of Tetris trying to get rid of stuff as you're getting stuff for kids. But on the, re-commerce versus in-person thrift or secondhand markets, what I think is really interesting is that a lot of these online re-commerce sites are kind of really anchoring their logics around circularity. They're promoting circularity, even as there's so much interest in them that there's more new stuff flooding these systems. So I did some ethnographic research at a conference for Poshmark, and people were talking about sourcing and saying that they're buying truckloads of retail seconds. So it's stuff that didn't sell in the retail environment. It's never been used, but they're buying that and then individually selling it on Poshmark. And they're buying so much stuff, filling warehouses and hiring people to photograph and price and display it. And so I just see like, the promise of circularity in some of these platforms not being, practiced as they get bigger and bigger. You see an increasing number of things that are labeled new with tags, which is great for sellers because they sell for more, but it's like, oh my goodness, if everything is new with tags, then are we doing the same kind of, thing for our climate that we were hoping to do? And then there's really interesting claims about sociality. They talk about like social closets and being part of a community. But you see like the kinds of interpersonal engagement that's possible on these platforms is not in any way similar to what I would see in an in-person experience. So I'm trying to still develop the language to contrast these things and get at like what the big differences are. But I do worry that the big platforms are going to start to like suck away the really high quality stuff from our local establishments, making it harder for them to thrive.
That is kind of mind-blowing. I didn't realize that people were, buying like truckloads, but it makes sense. I don't know. There's such those ads can pop up all the time when you're looking for something kind of related.
Oh gosh, I was really shocked too. Like frantically scribbling down truckloads, exclamation mark, question mark. Yeah, it's not just like one or two people. They're like high volume resellers who are getting stuff new to resell on there.
Isn't that what isn't that like what legit retailers do, like Martin's and others?
Yeah, they're becoming they are, yep, it is. It's very interesting. Yeah.
I have another question. So we're in Portland, South Portland, or many of us attending art. And I think I would be interested to know if there are any like distinct differences by the like ways that more rural areas participate in these economies versus urban. I know like on my street, we have like a little like street library where people leave books or like spatulas or like, I don't know, weird things. And I think it's awesome because I've taken stuff and put stuff in it. But yeah, I'm wondering if you've noticed any like key differences between urban and rural.
Yeah, we were looking for that in our research. And what we ended up finding was not so much rural and urban differences as much as like wealth differences, which can kind of track across rural urban differences as well, depending on locality. We sort of expected like thrifty rural communities and like less reuse in urban centers, but we didn't find that. And we found actually that reuse seems to be growing most rapidly in places with higher incomes. So I think that how reuse plays out is quite different. Tiny little free libraries and things like that are much more common in urban centers. And then we've got like the side of the road being a much more frequent option in rural communities. But yeah, the flavor tends to be different, but there's vibrant sectors in both rural and urban communities for sure.
Do you think, so you just said that, yeah, like with more wealth, you see more people participating in reuse. Do you think that's like kind of like a bell curve though? Like I'd be interested to know more about that.
Yeah, so I'm really interested in that too. And I'm wondering if it's a trend thing right now. Like reuse has become really popular, right? And we're a little bit worried that it's gentrifying in ways that are going to harm the sector, but it's also really exciting, right? Like our goal is to get more people using stuff. But so it's not just a function of poverty, which is great, right? Like we don't want it to just be a need-based thing. But it for sure surprised us that we are seeing more reuse or reuse growing faster in communities with higher incomes. Anecdotally, you're seeing stuff on New York Times about like really luxury high-end resale. I don't know if it would be a bell curve or not. I think it depends on if we're talking about quantity, number of participants, or dollars spent. But I will say, like, we've done 6 or 7 years of research on this, and we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much to explore, which is really cool. It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, I just think it's so interesting. It's like food. It affects so many different aspects of life and people.
Yeah.
I want to leave the floor open if there are other questions, though.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could speak to the successes or shortfalls of companies like Patagonia and Darn Tough who do, the worn wear programs and, definitely emphasize quality over quantity and do like not lifetime warranty, but lifetime return policies. Just curious if you think that's a working model or, if it is greenwashing in some ways.
Well, so I don't know if it's working financially for them. That's something that I haven't looked at. But what I will say is I've heard from folks who are operating reuse establishments who are frustrated by the quality of stuff that they're getting. And so reuse is really predicated on having high quality stuff moving through systems, right? It's predicated on durability. And so if we're designing stuff that's not meant to last, it was never meant to be reused, which is a real issue, right? Like if everything that's going through local thrift shops is fast fashion and it's like already been worn out after 3 uses, then people aren't going to come and get that stuff. So the converse of that question is like, I think we've got a problem with we have a durability problem in reuse that we need to address. I do think that as reuse becomes more popular, we're also seeing more brand specific programs to capture stuff back again, like Patagonia's Worn Wear. Eileen Fisher is doing something similar. I think Levi's is too. Like there's all these brands that are like willing to take their stuff back to resell it on their own marketplaces. So on the one hand, I think it's fantastic that they're designing with durability in mind and that they're willing to host a marketplace for that stuff to live another life. On the other hand, like one reason that some tourists love Maine thrift stores is because you can find like LL Bean stuff there and you can't find it in any other thrift stores anywhere. And so like, you know, I think LL Bean is still like high quality, you know, they're still producing great stuff, even though their lifetime warranty isn't the same. But if we start to lose that really durable stuff to all these brand specific programs, I worry about what will be left behind in our thrift shops. So can't speak to the impact on the brands themselves, but these are the kinds of questions that I do worry about. Like, are we splintering this off into so many different marketplaces and reducing the availability of this stuff for, you know, regular people who are looking for a bargain, but still trying to find something durable?
I have a question.
Oh yeah, go Susan.
So I'm wondering with your research, how much you looked into repair shops, or if you've seen an increase in repair shops with the increase in popularity in thrifting.
So we don't have data over time on repair shops. We were looking at repair and some of the issues and promise of repair. And I think that it might be tracking the same kind of, you know, so prepare for use is where we situate repair. I think it might be tracking, but perhaps following reuse in that, like, as we start to value keeping stuff for longer, it means we need to steward those objects, and therefore we need more repair businesses. So I don't have great data on it, except to say there seem to be places that never lost their repair sectors versus other places that did, and I think we're seeing them grow again. But that's just maybe it's hopeful and not like based solidly in data, but I do think that that's happening.
I think that's such an important question, Susan. And to bring it back to what Bree was speaking about earlier too, is like a lot of this I think is like knowledge and like also the older generation participating in things. When I think about like upholstering or like repairing clocks, like I don't know how to do that, and I really doubt any of my friends know how to do that either. And so I think it's really important to like keep those skills and knowledge still like something that you teach more and more in repair, because some of those things are so niche. I don't know, that's really interesting. I don't know if you have anything to say on that, or yeah, I think that's so, repair is so important.
It's so important, but like you have to have stuff that can be repaired too, which is the challenge. So if you're getting stuff used, like a lot of that stuff can be repaired, but like if you're buying, for example, furniture from IKEA or Wayfair that's just glued together, like it's just pieces of cardboard, basically, like you can't really fix that in meaningful ways. So it is sort of predicated on object durability and quality to begin with. And a similar thing for garments. Yeah. So it's a skill thing and a design thing.
I just wanted to mention that my fiance on Wednesday night, I guess, hosted a clothing swap, which is super fun. And she had 12 friends in our living room, just holding up clothes, and people scream and grab it. And, you know, they just get to totally revamp their wardrobe overnight without spending a dime, and get rid of the stuff that they were, you know, couldn't consign for this reason or the next. but just a fun thing to do. I had to vacate the house, but you know.
I love that though. And I think it like speaks to all the ways that we'll never fully be able to like map out what's happening in reuse economies, because how could we ever track all the people that are like meeting in someone's living room to swap clothes? Like that's part of the reason why it's really tricky to like put a number or like any kind of a value on secondhand economies, because it can happen anywhere like that. That's fun though.
Any more questions from the crowd?
Hi, I don't really have a question, but I wanted to say that I enjoyed hearing about your research, and you've given me a lot to think about, because I participate in Buy Nothing and a lot of the other things that folks have mentioned. But I'm also running my church yard sale next weekend. And we're talking about, you know, selling things at the sale, and maybe someone skimming off the more valuable items to sell elsewhere so that we make more money for the church. And then, you know, if there's stuff left over, like what organizations do we give all that stuff to? So it's a lot of moving reuse pieces. Yeah, mostly thank you.
Yeah, and they're all questions about value, right? Like I can't tell you the number of thrift stores I've talked to that talk about like, well, should we take the really high-end stuff and sell it online? We'll get more money, but like, what is our goal, right? Is it to make money for our organization? Is it to give access to people who might want or need it? Is it to like provide the joy of the find from getting like some treasure that you didn't expect, you know? And all of those are really valid. And so, yeah, it's just a series of choices that you have to make. Good luck with your yard sale, though. Hope it goes well for whatever goals you set up for it. Can I ask a question really quick? I'm just curious, does anyone have a story about something they got used that was really exciting to them that you want to share?
I'll share one. I was at a Goodwill in Vermont, and I found a set of all-clad stainless steel pans, and there was a perfect set. They were a little like they needed some care, but it's like a $300 set of pans, and they were $3 a piece, and they're perfect now, and I use them every day, and I think that's my favorite thrifting find.
That's amazing. Julie, you had one too.
I bet you everybody, I bet you everyone has something. But before I had this job, I worked at a college, and we had a program called Clean Sweep, and it was at the end of the year. We went around and collected from every dorms and from all the stuff the kids had left behind, and we said, just donate your stuff. We filled the entire ice arena, and we staffed it with nonprofit organizations. And the number of hours that they put in, they got all of the proceeds as a percentage of the number of hours that their volunteers put in. It was such a great program. And so many of us have like, oh yeah, clean sweep, because the stuff that the students left behind that, you know, other students could use, or people from the community would line up and love this program. It was really great because of the closed loop work with the nonprofit organizations who used it as a source of revenue for their stuff. We raised like $40,000 in last year or something. But I got a great set of tools.
That's such a good example of how things can serve multiple values too. Like we're not always choosing between ones. They can do lots of things at once. I see you, Emma.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. This has been a really interesting discussion. Sorry about the black screen. I also wanted to just mention, when someone passes, where does all their stuff go? And I mean, a lot of it ends up at Goodwill. When my friend passed, you know, there was sort of a room where all of her effects were gathered, and her friends would come and take a memento. I got my friend's, you know, motorcycle boots, which when I put them on remind me of her. But the rest of the stuff went to Goodwill and stuff like that. It happened on multiple times a day, I'm sure, you know, in every single state. So that's just another source of stuff that people don't know what to do with. They don't know what it's valued as. it means a lot to the person who passed. It might mean a little to their family, but you know, who takes that huge burden on? And it usually is the thrift stores that sort of get this huge bolus of stuff and have to deal with it.
Oh gosh, that is such a good point. And you know, sometimes I remember when I was doing my research, I was volunteering at some of these thrift stores, and we got donations. They were like funeral blankets. So someone's like picture had been screen printed on with their birth and death date on there. And we got to these donations, they're in plastic packaging, like clearly they'd never been opened. And, you know, all the volunteers are like, it's a useful blanket, right? Like nothing wrong with it, but it's so personal, right? Like who's going to use that blanket? Like, do we want to put that out for sale? And so we were lucky to have a textile recycling, but we just put it right in there, you know, because it's so tied to that person that it loses its value for anyone else. But thinking about the burden on thrift stores, some of the work that I do looks at like the emotional burden of volunteers who, you know, when people don't know what to do with their stuff, they donate it. And these volunteers then have to say like, sorry, that's trash, but they don't say it to the people donating. They have to make that choice, and they have the burden of discarding a community's waste, which can be exhausting, emotionally exhausting, especially because a lot of people are volunteering because they want to reduce waste. And yet they're like, we can't use this, or we can't sell. I know we can't sell this. We have too many, or, you know, it just won't be useful. So it's a great point and a sad one.
Does anyone want to close us out with a fun find from a fun find, not a sad find, from a thrift store or a flea market? I'm so excited for yard sales. It's like, it's coming.
We're close.
If not, go for it.
Well, I was gonna say, so one thing that still kind of gives me chills. My grandmother, I have a pillowcase for my grandmother. She died in last year, and it has these owls on it. I have no idea where she got it from. It's this really cool brown pillowcase that I've had for like 15 years. My daughter's just transitioning to a twin bed, and I went to the thrift store to buy some twin bed sheets. And what did I find but the matching sheet to that pillowcase? And like my grandmother loved thrifting, and I was just like, I just stared at it and I was like, I cannot believe it's the right size for my daughter's bed. My daughter's like, it was just like so cool to find that thing. Felt really serendipitous. And they're just really cool. There's owls on them. It's neat. Yeah. That's my treasure. Thanks for talking about secondhand with me, you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Bree, for joining us. This was a really fun coffee and climate. So yeah, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you all for participating. Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll send some things in a follow-up email. So thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.